I don't date black women, the Korean Mafia boss said, until she walked in and stole his heart. He had built an empire on blood and discipline, controlled soul shadows with an iron fist, and sworn he would never let a black woman into his world. Then Cheryl Bennett walked into that rooftop party in a deep purple gown, and Junwoo Park, the untouchable Korean Mafia boss, felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble with a single glance. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The rooftop of the Hanul Grand Hotel shimmered like a jewel suspended above Seoul's heartbeat. Below, the Han River carved through the city in ribbons of black silk, reflecting the neon glow of Gangnam skyscrapers. The Namsan Tower blinked red in the distance, a sentinel watching over a metropolis that never truly slept. Up here, 50 floors above the chaos, Korea's elite gathered in their designer hanbok-inspired gowns and custom Italian suits, champagne flutes catching the golden light of 100 lanterns swaying in the October breeze. Junwoo Park stood apart from the bowing crowd, a glass of Macallan 25 dangling from his fingers, his expression carved from stone. At 39, he had mastered the art of appearing bored while cataloging every threat in a room. His black Tom Ford suit fit like armor, tailored to perfection, hiding the lean muscle of a man who had clawed his way from the streets of Itaewon to the throne of the Geometry Lounge Syndicate. The Black Dragon. Seoul's underworld whispered his name with equal parts reverence and terror. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Show face at Chairman Huang's 50th birthday celebration. Remind the old guard that he still controlled the city's shadows, and leave before the speeches grew tedious. He had already shaken the necessary hands, exchanged the required pleasantries in flawless Korean laced with just enough menace to keep everyone on edge. But then the elevator doors opened, and everything changed. She stepped out like she owned the night itself. Cheryl Bennett moved through the crowd with a kind of confidence that didn't need announcement. Her deep purple satin gown caught the lamplight and transformed it into liquid gold against her dark skin. The dress was elegant, understated, no excessive embellishment, just perfect tailoring that spoke of wealth so old it didn't need a shout. Her hair was styled and sleek, natural curls that framed a face of striking beauty. High cheekbones, full lips painted a subtle burgundy, and eyes that assessed the room with the sharp intelligence of someone who had conquered boardrooms on 3 continents. Junwoo's heart, that treacherous, supposedly dead thing in his chest, lurched. He froze mid-sip, the scotch suddenly tasteless on his tongue. Around him, he felt a shift in the crowd's energy. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through clusters of socialites like wind through grass. He saw the reactions he'd witnessed 1,000 times in conservative Korean circles. Curiosity poorly masked as politeness, judgment hidden behind fan-covered mouths, the subtle step backward that marked her as different, as other. Not your kind, a voice whispered in the back of his mind. It was his grandfather's voice, cold and certain. Asterisk, these people don't belong in our world. They never have, asterisk. Junwoo had grown up with these prejudices woven into the fabric of his existence as tightly as the code of the syndicate. His family, before he destroyed most of them to claim his throne, had been traditionalists of the worst kind. He'd internalized their poison young, built walls around his heart with it, used it as just another tool to maintain the rigid control that kept him alive in a world where weakness meant death. He had never dated a black woman, had never considered it, had dismissed them entirely with the casual cruelty of someone who had never bothered to examine his own bigotry. But now, watching Cheryl Bennett scan the crowd with those intelligent eyes, he felt something crack inside those walls. His pulse quickened. His usually steady hands tightened around the crystal glass. She wasn't looking for approval from these people. She wasn't trying to make herself smaller or more palatable. She simply was magnificent and utterly unbothered by the stares. When her gaze swept past him, Junwoo felt the impact like a physical blow. "Who is that?" he murmured to the man beside him. His lieutenant, Sang-woo, who served as both bodyguard and the closest thing Junwoo had to a friend. Sang-woo followed his boss's stare and raised an eyebrow. director of Bennett Global's Asia Division. American, here for the Daewin Bennett merger talks. Word is she's Richard Bennett's daughter. He paused, reading Jun Woo's expression with the expertise of 15 years of service. You want me to arrange an introduction? Jun Woo should have said no, should have turned away, finished his drink, and left this rooftop before he did something foolish. Instead, he heard himself say, "No, I'll handle it myself." Sang Woo's other eyebrow joined the first, nearly disappearing into his hairline, but he was too well-trained to comment. He simply nodded and melted back into the shadows where Jun Woo's men always lurked, invisible sentinels in a world of silk and champagne. Jun Woo set down his glass and began moving through the crowd. People parted for him automatically. They always did. He was aware of his reputation preceding him like a cold wind. The corporate tycoon who somehow always won his bids, whose competitors frequently experienced unfortunate accidents, whose business empire was whispered to be built on foundations of blood and intimidation. No one here knew for certain that he was the head of the Geometry Liang syndicate, but everyone suspected. That suspicion kept them compliant, kept them useful. Cheryl had claimed a spot at the bar, a small island of calm in the sea of networking and false laughter. Up close, she was even more stunning. Her skin seemed to glow in the warm light, and when she turned to accept a glass of wine from the bartender, Jun Woo caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something with notes of jasmine and amber that made his thoughts scatter like startled birds. "Good evening," he said, his voice coming out slightly rougher than intended. She turned, and those dark eyes fixed on him with complete, unhurried attention. A small smile played at the corner of her lips, polite, professional, but with a hint of amusement that suggested she knew exactly who he was and wasn't particularly impressed. "Good evening," she replied. Her voice was warm, rich, with a confident American accent that marked her as thoroughly foreign in this space. "I don't think we've met." Jun Woo extended his hand, suddenly aware that his usual commanding presence felt clumsy in the face of her composed elegance. Jun Woo Park. Her handshake was firm, brief, perfectly calibrated. Cheryl Bennett. She didn't bow, didn't avert her eyes the way Korean women often did when meeting him. She met him as an equal, and something in Jun Woo's chest tightened at the simple dignity of it. "You're far from home," he observed, immediately wanting to kick himself for the obviousness of the statement. "So is everyone here, in one way or another," she replied, glancing around the rooftop with those assessing eyes. "Though I suppose some of us wear our displacement more visibly than others." The observation was pointed without being bitter, intelligent without being harsh. Jun Woo found himself genuinely curious, a rare feeling for a man who had long ago grown bored with most human interaction. "You don't seem particularly concerned by that," he said. "Why would I be?" Cheryl took a sip of her wine, her gaze never leaving his. "I know who I am, Mr. Park. I know what I'm worth. Whether Seoul's elite approve is, frankly, not something that keeps me up at night." And there was the blunt honesty that would have been considered rude in Korean business culture, but somehow, from her, felt refreshing. Jun Woo realized he was smiling, actually smiling, a genuine expression that felt foreign on his face. "That's a luxury not many people in this room can claim," he said. "Is a luxury?" Cheryl tilted her head slightly, studying him with that same focused intelligence. "Or is it simply refusing to perform for an audience that's already made up its mind about you?" The question landed between them like a challenge. Jun Woo recognized it for what it was, a test, a way of seeing if he was just another Seoul businessman with shallow curiosity about the exotic American, or something more. He chose honesty, surprising himself. "This entire party is a performance. Everyone here is playing a role." "Including you?" she asked. "Especially me. And what role are you playing tonight, Mr. Park? The bored billionaire? The mysterious tycoon? The man who stands apart from the crowd, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else?" Jun Woo laughed. Actually laughed, a sound so unexpected that a couple nearby turned to stare. He couldn't remember the last time someone had seen through him so quickly, so completely. It was dangerous. It was exhilarating. "All of the above," he admitted, "though you've made the evening considerably more interesting." "Have I?" Cheryl's smile widened slightly, genuine warmth creeping into her expression. "Well, I suppose that's something. This party was starting to feel like a very expensive museum exhibit, beautiful to look at, but you're not really supposed to touch anything or have too much fun. They stood there at the bar, two people from completely different worlds, and talked. Really talked. Junwoo found himself discussing architecture and city planning. The way Seoul had transformed itself over the past decades. The tension between tradition and progress that defined modern Korea. Cheryl spoke about her work, about the challenges of navigating Asian business culture as a Black American woman, about her love for Seoul's energy despite its conservative undercurrents. Time slipped away. The party continued around them. Speeches were made, toasts were raised. Chairman Huang accepted his lavish gifts with practiced humility. But Junwoo barely noticed. For the first time in years, he was fully present in a moment, captivated by the woman before him who challenged him, amused him, and somehow made him want to be better than the cold, calculating monster he'd become. When Cheryl finally glanced at her watch and mentioned needing to catch an early morning conference call, Junwoo felt an almost physical reluctance to let the evening end. "Can I see you again?" he asked, the question escaping before he could censor it. "Perhaps for coffee? Or dinner?" Cheryl studied him for a long moment, and Junwoo realized with a start that he actually cared about her answer. He, who could command loyalty with fear and respect with power, stood here hoping this woman would grant him her time. "Are you sure you want to do that, Mr. Park?" she asked quietly. "I saw the looks tonight. Your world doesn't exactly embrace people like me with open arms." "My world," Junwoo said, his voice dropping into a tone that had made grown men tremble, "does what I tell it to do." Cheryl's lips curved into a smile that held both challenge and promise. "Then yes, Mr. Park. Dinner sounds lovely." As she walked away, her purple gown flowing behind her like royalty departing, Junwoo stood at the bar and felt the foundations of his carefully ordered existence begin to shift. He had built his empire on control, on tradition, on walls that kept the world at a safe distance. But Cheryl Bennett had walked through those walls as if they were made of paper, and Junwoo Park, the terrifying head of the Geometry Lyong Syndicate, the man who had sworn he would never let someone like her into his life, realized with startling clarity that he was in serious trouble. The best kind of trouble. The morning sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Junwoo's penthouse office in the Gangnam Financial District, illuminating the sleek minimalism that defined his public persona. Black leather, chrome fixtures, and a desk made of reclaimed Korean oak that cost more than most people earned in a year. On the surface, Park Industries was a legitimate empire. Real estate development, tech investments, luxury hospitality. Beneath that polished veneer ran the true source of his power. The Geometry Lyong Syndicate's grip on Seoul's underworld. Junwoo stared at the contract in front of him, reading the same paragraph for the fifth time without comprehending a single word. His mind kept drifting back to the rooftop, to purple satin and intelligent eyes, to a smile that had somehow bypassed every defense he'd spent decades constructing. "You haven't touched your coffee," Sang-woo observed from his position by the door. "And you've been staring at that Busan development proposal for 20 minutes without signing it." Junwoo set down his pen with deliberate care. "Tell me everything about Cheryl Bennett." Sang-woo didn't even blink at the request. He'd clearly anticipated it. He pulled out his phone and began reciting information with the efficiency that made him invaluable. Cheryl Marie Bennett, 34 years old, born in Atlanta, Georgia, MBA from Harvard Business School. She's been with Bennett Global for 8 years, worked her way up from junior analyst to director of Asian operations. Her father, Richard Bennett, founded the company 40 years ago. It's now worth approximately $18 billion. She's currently overseeing the Daewon Bennett merger, which, if successful, will be the largest foreign acquisition of a Korean tech firm in history. Junwoo leaned back in his chair, absorbing this. Family. Parents divorced when she was 12. Mother is a retired professor of African American studies. One younger brother, currently working as a civil rights attorney in New York. No current romantic relationships that our sources can confirm. She's been in Seoul for 6 months, maintains an apartment in Hanam-dong, and by all accounts is brilliant at her job. Tough but fair in negotiations. Political affiliations? Vulnerabilities? Sang-woo hesitated. "Boss, with respect, why does this feel like you're preparing for a hostile takeover rather than a dinner date?" Junwoo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Because I need to understand her. Or, Sang-woo said carefully, you could just have dinner with her and let things unfold naturally. Like normal people do. I haven't been normal people since I was 15 years old and watched my father bleed out in an alley in Itaewon. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. Sang-woo knew better than to push further. He'd been there that night, had helped the teenage Jun-woo drag himself out of the gutter and into the merciless world of the syndicate. They'd built this empire together, one body at a time. There's something else, Sang-woo said quietly. Your mother called this morning. She heard about last night. Apparently, half of Seoul Society Circuit is gossiping about you spending an hour talking to that American woman at Chairman Huang's party. Jun-woo felt his jaw tighten. And she wants to remind you of your responsibilities to the family name. Her words, not mine. Sang-woo's tone made it clear what he thought of those words. She's concerned about appearances. My mother hasn't cared about my life since I took over the syndicate from her precious brother, Jun-woo said flatly. She only cares now because I'm doing something that makes her uncomfortable. It's not just her. The elders are already talking. You know how conservative they are about, Sang-woo paused, choosing his words carefully, about maintaining traditional standards. Traditional standards. The polite euphemism for the racism that ran deep in Korea's old guard. The same poison Jun-woo had internalized without question for most of his life. He thought about his grandfather's teachings, about the rigid hierarchies and prejudices that had shaped him, about how easily he dismissed entire groups of people without ever questioning why. Then he thought about Cheryl, standing at that bar with her head held high, undiminished by the judgment surrounding her. Set up the dinner reservation, Jun-woo said. Somewhere private. Somewhere she'll be comfortable. The private room at Mingles? The chef there, no, Jun-woo stood, moving to the window to look out over the city he controlled from the shadows. Too pretentious. Find somewhere with good food and honest atmosphere. Somewhere that doesn't feel like another performance. Sang-woo made a note on his phone, but his expression was troubled. Boss, I have to ask, are you sure about this? If you pursue this, there will be consequences. The syndicate, the business partners, your family, they won't accept it easily. Jun-woo turned from the window, and his eyes held the cold certainty that had made him the most feared man in Seoul's underworld. Then they'll learn to adapt. Make the reservation, Sang-woo. That's an order. After his lieutenant left, Jun-woo returned to his desk. But instead of reviewing contracts, he found himself staring at his phone, at the number Cheryl had given him the night before. For the first time in 20 years, Jun-woo Park felt something he'd thought long dead. Hope. And it terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The restaurant Sang-woo chose was a small, family-owned establishment tucked into a quiet street in Seongsadong, far from the glittering towers of Gangnam. Warm wooden beams crossed the ceiling, and the aroma of sizzling galbi and fermented kimchi filled the air with comforting authenticity. Jun-woo arrived early, dismissing his security detail to wait outside. He wanted this evening to feel normal, even though nothing about his life had been normal since he was a teenager. Cheryl arrived exactly on time, dressed in elegant black slacks and a cream silk blouse that somehow made her look both professional and effortlessly beautiful. When she smiled at him, Jun-woo felt that same disorienting lurch in his chest he'd experienced on the rooftop. This is unexpected, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. I half expected you to choose some Michelin-starred place where the portions are tiny and the silence is oppressive. Would you have preferred that? Jun-woo asked. God, no. Cheryl laughed, genuine and warm. I've had enough of those places to last a lifetime. This feels real. I like it. They ordered, Jun-woo guiding her through the menu, watching her face light up as she tried things she'd never tasted before. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they'd known each other far longer than a single evening. She told him about growing up in Atlanta, about her parents' messy divorce, and how she'd learned early to build walls around her heart. He found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about his childhood in Itaewon before everything fell apart, about the small moments of beauty he'd found in a life defined by violence. Can I ask you something personal? Cheryl said, her chopsticks pausing over a piece of perfectly grilled beef. You can ask. I may not answer. Last night, at the party, you noticed the way people looked at me. At us. But you stayed anyway. Why? Junwoo set down his own chopsticks, meeting her gaze directly. Honest answer. Always. Because I couldn't walk away. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I was raised with certain beliefs. Prejudices, if I'm being truthful. My grandfather taught me that there were lines you didn't cross. People who didn't belong in our world. For most of my life, I never questioned those teachings. Cheryl's expression remained neutral, but he saw the subtle tension in her shoulders. And now I realize I was a fool. Junwoo's voice was low and tense. Those beliefs, they kept me isolated, kept me from seeing what was right in front of me. You walked into that party, and something in me recognized that I'd been living half a life, surrounded by people who feared me, but never truly saw me. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, but not quite touching. You saw me, Cheryl. Not the reputation, not the power. Just me. She looked at his hand, then back at his face, her eyes searching for something. Junwoo, I need you to understand something. I've dealt with men who were curious about me, who wanted to check some box or prove how progressive they were. I've been an experiment, a rebellion, a phase. I won't be that for you. You're not. Let me finish. Her voice was gentle but firm. If we do this, if we continue seeing each other, it's going to get harder, not easier. Seoul's elite won't accept it. Your business partners will question your judgment. Your family, she paused, reading something in his expression. Your family will make your life hell. I've lived this before in other cities, other countries. I know what's coming. Junwoo finally took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. Then let it come. I've built my entire life on control, on maintaining appearances and meeting expectations. For once, I want to choose something for myself. Someone for myself. He tightened his grip slightly. I want to choose you, Cheryl, if you'll let me. The restaurant hummed with life around them. Families sharing meals, friends laughing over soju, the clatter of dishes, and the sizzle of grills. In the midst of it all, Cheryl Bennett looked at Junwoo Park and made a decision that would change both their lives. Okay, she said softly, but we do this honestly. No games, no hiding. If you're in, you're all in. I'm all in, Junwoo replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Outside the restaurant, in the shadows where his men waited, Sangwoo received a text message that made his blood run cold. It was from his syndicate's intelligence network. Asterisk, the elders are watching. They're not pleased. Prepare for consequences. Asterisk. But inside, Junwoo and Cheryl continued their dinner, two people from different worlds building a bridge between them, one honest conversation at a time. Neither of them knew that the hardest battles were yet to come. Here's what I want to know. Do you think the Korean elite will accept Junwoo's choice? Or will they try to destroy what he's building with Cheryl? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if you believe everyone deserves to love who they choose without judgment, hit that subscribe button. Only bigots and haters won't. The weeks that followed were stolen moments between their demanding schedules. Coffee meetings that stretched into lunch, late-night phone calls that lasted until dawn, walks along the Han River where they could pretend to be just two people falling in love. Junwoo found himself tracking her movements throughout the day, not with his syndicate's resources, but with a nervous anticipation of a man who had never felt this vulnerable before. But paradise never lasts in the underworld. The confrontation came on a cold November evening in Junwoo's private office. His consul, Min Jun, a silver-haired man who had served the Dumitrilong syndicate for 40 years, stood before his desk with a kind of rigid disapproval that radiated from every pore. The elders are concerned, Min Jun said, his voice clipped and formal. Your recent associations are causing talk throughout the organization. Junwoo didn't look up from the document he was reviewing. My personal life is not the syndicate's concern. Everything you do is the syndicate's concern. Min Jun stepped closer, his tone sharpening. You're not just a man, Junwoo. You are the head of the Black Dragon. Your choices reflect on all of us, on our traditions, on our standing in Korean society. Now Junwoo did look up, his eyes cold. Get to the point. The woman. The American. Min Jun practically spat the words. You cannot be seen with someone like her. A man of your lineage, your position, it's unseemly. It damages our reputation with the conservative families who support us. It makes you look weak, impulsive. Junwoo set down his pen with deliberate care, the gesture more threatening than any raised voice. Someone like her, he repeated softly. Explain what you mean by that, Min-jun. The older man had the sense to hesitate, but decades of ingrained prejudice won out over self-preservation. You know what I mean? She's not Korean. She's not even Asian. He paused, searching for words that wouldn't quite cross the line into explicit racism. She's not appropriate for a man in your position. There are suitable women from good families who would be honored to stop talking. Junwoo's voice dropped into the dangerous register that made hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. Now, Min-jun fell silent, but his expression remained defiant. Around them, the office seemed to hold its breath. Through the windows, Seoul glittered in the darkness, unaware of the battle of wills taking place in this tower. I will say this once, Junwoo continued, standing slowly. Cheryl Bennett is not a topic for discussion. Not with you, not with the elders, not with anyone in this organization. What I choose to do with my personal life is not subject to your approval or the approval of narrow-minded old men clinging to prejudices that should have died generations ago. The syndicate has traditions. The syndicate, Junwoo interrupted, his voice rising slightly, exists because I rebuilt it from ashes after the old guard traditions nearly destroyed us. I dragged this organization into the modern era. I made us powerful, wealthy, untouchable. And I did it by knowing when to hold on to tradition and when to burn it to the ground. Min-jun's face flushed red. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. This woman, she's manipulated you somehow, made you forget who you are, what you represent. In a few months, you'll come to your senses, but by then the damage to your reputation. Junwoo moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. One moment, he was behind his desk. The next, he had Min-jun pressed against the wall, forearm across the older man's throat. Not enough pressure to choke, but enough to make his point crystal clear. Listen very carefully, Junwoo said, his face inches from Min-jun's. If you ever suggest that Cheryl has manipulated me, if you ever imply that my feelings for her are anything less than genuine, I will forget the 40 years of loyal service you've given this family. I will forget that you helped train me, that you stood by me when I took power. Do you understand? Min-jun's eyes were wide with shock and, for the first time, genuine fear. He managed a jerky nod. Junwoo released him and stepped back, smoothing his suit jacket with hands that didn't quite tremble. Tell the elders that if they have concerns about my personal life, they can raise them with me directly. But they should choose their words very, very carefully. Min-jun straightened his collar, some of his composure returning. You're making a mistake, Junwoo. You may be powerful now, but power built on scandal and controversy crumbles quickly. The families talk. The business partners talk. Soon enough, your enemies will use this against you. Then let them try. Junwoo returned to his desk, dismissing the older man with a gesture. I've spent my entire life doing what others expected of me. For once, I'm doing what I want. Now, get out. After Min-jun left, Junwoo stood at his window, staring out at the city lights. His phone buzzed, a text from Cheryl. Missing you. Bad day at negotiations. Coffee tomorrow? He smiled despite the tension still coiled in his shoulders. Tomorrow. And Cheryl, thank you for existing. Her response came quickly. That's the weirdest sweet thing anyone's ever said to me. I like it. The charity gala at the Shilla Hotel was the social event of the season. Seoul's wealthiest and most powerful gathering under crystal chandeliers to write checks for causes they'd forget by morning. Junwoo had attended dozens of these events over the years, always alone, always maintaining the image of the untouchable bachelor who belonged to no one. Tonight was different. Tonight, Cheryl walked beside him in a stunning emerald gown that made her skin glow like burnished gold. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, her hand resting lightly on his arm, ignoring the whispers that followed them like a cold wind. You're staring, she murmured, a hint of amusement in her voice. I'm allowed to stare at the most beautiful woman in the room. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Park. They navigated the evening with practiced ease, making small talk with business partners, deflecting intrusive questions about their relationship, presenting a united front that made some people uncomfortable and others openly hostile. Junwoo felt the tension building, saw the glances exchanged between the old guard families, the barely concealed sneers from women who had once hoped to catch his attention. The breaking point came near the champagne fountain. Park Ji-yoon materialized from the crowd like a designer-clad ghost from Junwoo's past. She had been his girlfriend years ago, the daughter of a rival syndicate family, beautiful in the conventional Korean way, pale skin, delicate features, demure smile. Their relationship had been strategic, passionless, and ultimately meaningless. Junwoo, she said, her voice sweet as poison. How wonderful to see you. And you must be Miss Bennett. I've heard so much about you. Cheryl extended her hand graciously. All good things, I hope. Oh, of course. Ji-yoon's smile never wavered as she ignored the offered handshake. It's just so interesting, seeing Junwoo with someone so different from his usual type. So exotic. The word hung in the air like a slap. Junwoo felt his entire body go rigid, but Cheryl simply smiled wider, completely unbothered. Exotic, Cheryl repeated. How refreshingly honest. Most people here just think it loudly. Ji-yoon's smile tightened. I simply meant that people like us, she gestured between herself and Junwoo, we belong together. We understand each other's world, our families, our traditions. Don't you think, Junwoo? Before Junwoo could respond, a drunken voice cut through the nearby conversations. Kim Tae-sung, a chaebol heir known for his crass behavior and bottomless wallet, stood near the bar with his equally intoxicated friends, speaking in English loud enough to carry. Is he serious? The king of Seoul parading around with her? Tae-sung laughed, the sound ugly and grating. It must be a fetish or something. Everyone knows it won't last. He'll come back to his senses and choose someone appropriate. This is just his rebellious phase. The conversations around them died. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Junwoo felt something dark and primal rise in his chest. The same rage that had built his empire on the bones of men who had underestimated him. He turned slowly, his movement deliberate, predatory. The smile on Tae-sung's face faltered as he realized his words had been overheard by the one man in Seoul you never, ever disrespected. Junwoo crossed the space between them in measured steps. Each footfall echoed in the sudden silence. Tae-sung's friends scattered like rats, leaving him alone to face the consequences of his stupidity. If you have something to say about the woman I am with, Junwoo said, his voice carrying the weight of violence barely restrained, then say it to me directly. Otherwise, keep your ignorance and your pathetic opinions to yourself. Tae-sung's face went pale. I didn't mean, you meant every word. Junwoo stepped closer, close enough that Tae-sung could see the absolute certainty of retribution in his eyes. But let me be perfectly clear, so there's no confusion. If I ever hear my name or Cheryl's name from your mouth again, if you so much as look in her direction with anything less than complete respect, I will destroy you. Not quickly, not cleanly. I will dismantle your family's company piece by piece. I will ruin your father's reputation. I will make sure that when people hear the name Kim Tae-sung, they think of nothing but failure and disgrace. Do we understand each other? Tae-sung nodded frantically, stumbling backward into the bar. His expensive suit was dark with sweat, his bravado completely evaporated. He fled the ballroom like a scolded child, leaving whispers and shocked faces in his wake. Junwoo turned back to find Cheryl standing exactly where he'd left her, her expression unreadable. He walked to her, suddenly uncertain, wondering if he'd gone too far, if she'd be horrified by the violence that lived so close to his surface. She took his hand and led him out to the balcony, away from the staring crowd. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did. Why? Junwoo cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the elegant line of her cheekbones. Because you deserve respect. Because I refuse to let anyone reduce you to less than who you are. Because, he paused, the words catching in his throat. Because I'm falling in love with you, Cheryl Bennett, and I will not stand by while small-minded people try to diminish what we have. Cheryl's eyes glistened in the moonlight. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and deep, a promise and an answer all at once. Inside the ballroom, Seoul's elite whispered and speculated. But out on that balcony, under the stars that had witnessed empires rise and fall, Junwoo Park finally understood what it meant to choose love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, and hope over the darkness that had defined him for so long. The war for their relationship had truly begun. But for this moment, they had already won. The morning after the gala, Junwoo woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The Seoul Society blogs had exploded overnight with photos of him threatening Tae-sung, of him kissing Cheryl on the balcony. Headlines screamed about the Mafia boss's controversial romance and Black Dragon's forbidden love. He deleted them all without reading and went to meet Cheryl for breakfast at a quiet cafe in Itaewon. She was already there, scrolling through her tablet with a bemused expression. "We're famous," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "Apparently I'm either a gold digger, a CIA operative, or a witch who's cast some kind of spell on you. The internet can't quite decide. Does it bother you?" Junwoo asked, searching her face for signs of regret. "Should it?" Cheryl set down the tablet and reached for his hand. "I knew what I was getting into. Though I have to admit, the witch theory is my favorite. Very dramatic." He loved her even more in that moment, for her resilience, her humor, her refusal to be diminished by people who didn't matter. But the media frenzy was only the beginning. The real battle was happening in the shadows, in the boardrooms and back rooms where Seoul's true power resided. That afternoon, Junwoo returned to his office to find an emergency meeting of the syndicate's inner circle waiting. 8 men, all older than him, all wearing expressions that ranged from disapproval to barely concealed fury. Min Jun stood at the head of the table, his face grave. "We need to discuss your recent actions." Min Jun began without preamble. "The incident at the Shilla has created problems. 3 of our key political allies have expressed concerns. 2 major business partners are reconsidering their arrangements. The conservative families are calling for a leadership review." Junwoo took his seat at the head of the table, his expression carved from ice. "A leadership review? How interesting. And who, exactly, do they think could replace me?" The silence was answer enough. No one in that room had the strength, the intelligence, or the sheer ruthlessness to hold the Geometry Liang together. They knew it. He knew it. This was posturing, an attempt to control him through intimidation. "Let me make something clear," Junwoo said, his voice deadly calm. "I built this syndicate into what it is today. I expanded our territory, tripled our revenue, and established connections that reach into every level of Korean society. I did this through strategic thinking and calculated risk-taking. My personal relationship with Cheryl Bennett falls into the same category." "Ow!" demanded one of the elders, Kim Dong-hyun, a wizened man who had served since Junwoo's grandfather's time. "How does dating an American black woman benefit the syndicate?" "Because it demonstrates that we are not constrained by the outdated prejudices of previous generations," Junwoo replied. "Korea is changing. The younger generation doesn't care about the old hierarchies the way you do. By being with Cheryl publicly, I'm positioning us as modern, progressive, connected to the global economy rather than trapped in insular tradition." It was a calculated argument, framing his personal choice in terms they might understand: power, strategy, positioning. But Min Jun wasn't fooled. "That's rationalization," the consigliera said quietly. "You love her. This isn't strategy. It's emotion, and emotion makes men vulnerable." Junwoo met his old mentor's eyes. "Yes, I love her. And yes, that makes me vulnerable in ways I've never been before. But also makes me stronger. For the first time in my life, I have something worth protecting beyond power and money. That kind of motivation is dangerous, Min Jun. Ask anyone who's ever tried to threaten what I care about." The implied threat hung in the air. These men knew what Junwoo was capable of when someone crossed him. They'd seen it firsthand. "The elders won't accept this," Kim Dong-hyun insisted. "They'll move against you. Perhaps not directly, but they'll undermine your authority, turn allies into enemies, wait for you to make a mistake. Then let them try." Junwoo stood, signaling the meeting was over. "I've faced worse enemies with less motivation. If anyone in this organization has a problem with my personal life, they can bring it to me directly. Otherwise, we focus on business." "Understood." The men filed out, some with grudging acceptance, others with barely concealed resentment. Only Sang-woo remained, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "You know this isn't over," he said once they were alone. "The old guard doesn't give up that easily." "I know." Junwoo returned to the window, his refuge when the weight of leadership grew too heavy. But I'm done living my life according to their rules, their prejudices, their narrow vision of what I should be. Even if it costs you everything. Junwoo thought about Cheryl's smile, the way she challenged him to be better, the warmth that flooded his chest every time she said his name. I've already lost everything that mattered once, he said quietly. I spent years building an empire on the ruins of my old life, convinced that power and control were enough. But they're not. Cheryl makes me remember what it's like to be human, to feel something beyond ambition and rage. His phone buzzed. A text from Cheryl. Asterisk finished with meetings early. Want to grab dinner and pretend we're normal people for a few hours? Asterisk. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually severe face. More than anything, outside his window, Seoul continued its relentless pace. Somewhere in the city, his enemies were plotting, the conservative elite were condemning him, and the old guard of the syndicate was sharpening their knives. But for tonight, he would have dinner with the woman he loved, and that would be enough. The storm was coming. Let it come. He'd weather worse. And he'd never had something worth fighting for before. Now he did.